Yeah, my name is Adam White. I am a campus pastor serving at the Lutheran Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Wow, I use social media. I have several different social media accounts personally, and the ministry that I lead and work with, the Lutheran Center, also has a number of social media accounts and platforms that we use. And funny enough, the first published article I ever wrote, I was asked to write it on the use of Facebook by churches, and I was writing a pro and con article. So the first thing I published was actually a conversation about the utility of Facebook. Yeah, I think I'll answer the use question first. The reason I use social media is it's clearly a platform where people communicate, and there's a sense in which the judicious use of social media allows you to connect with people in different ways, and perhaps to connect with people that you would otherwise not connect with. And when you're doing work like I'm doing, where you're doing ministry, especially in my case with young adults, being able to sort of be where those people are and communicate with them through the media that they're using is really, really important to help make those connections. I've also found social media to be really helpful in connecting with peers that are in different locations. And I think because I'm a campus pastor in a particular tradition, there really aren't a lot of other campus pastors in the theological tradition of which I'm a part all around me. So there's a sense in which we can have a thicker collegiality through some of those mechanisms that we could not otherwise have. So there's a lot of upside in that sense. Now going back to the beginning of my question, I talk about judicious. I mean, there's a lot of bad uses of social media as well. So I try to be careful about the way that I use, especially my personal accounts. Because I recognize that I'm connected with an organization, that I'm connected with a ministry, that I'm connected with a denomination. So in that sense, I don't even see my personal accounts as being my own. So there's a sense that when I'm posting, I'm making decisions about what I'm disclosing, what I'm not disclosing, how that's going to be seen in the overarching narrative of the ministry of which I'm a part and the church of which I'm a part. And that shapes the way that I use the media. Yeah, social media can be really toxic. You know, it's hard to, at this point, to not be aware of the ways in which people pile on and the ways in which people are really terrible to each other on social media when they might not be quite as terrible face to face. I think it's also easy to misread affect in social media. I mean, you don't have body cues, you don't have language, you don't have tone of voice. And there are certain platforms on social media where I think people always sort of impute the worst possible meaning of the text itself to the person. They read into all kinds of motivations that may or may not be there, because in some ways it's mere text. And for whatever reason, social media seems to breed, through its ability to comment in real time, a real kind of piling on relative to that sometimes is really harsh, and really unnecessary, and just downright mean. I also think that one thing that social media does, especially as I'm thinking about human development, is it functions as an amplifier. I think about this especially with adolescents. I have a daughter that's a freshman in high school right now. And when I was in high school, when we went home from school, we actually had a break from our peers. Whether we wanted one or not, I mean, there's very little you could do about that. You're home, you might have a friend over once, twice a week. Maybe you have a teen line. I had a teen line. It was pretty fantastic. And, you know, maybe I would call a friend, maybe one a night, but that's it. You know, so when you're home from school, you have time by yourself, you have time with silence, and you have time with your parents. And now all of a sudden, one of the things that social media does culturally is you're never really apart from your peers. There's that sense that something is always happening, something that might be important. You know, there's that whole sense of fear of missing out, right? And the pressure is always there to be plugged in. And there's no real break from that. So I think as an amplifier, as a cultural form of pressure, what social media does is it makes it very difficult to find those spaces where you can unplug without this sort of profound fear that you're going to miss something that's really important. And I do think in many ways that's detrimental. So people that have experienced the harshness of that and the difficulty of that, especially when it's paired with the meanness I was talking about earlier, I can see why they'd step away from that and say, I need a break. I need time and space, and even Sabbath and sort of religious language from this constant pressure of everything, of peer relationships and of popular culture. I think that's such an interesting framing of a question. I think you'd be hard-pressed to make a case that it does inhibit democracy. At least democracy insofar as we're considering democracy as a form of praxis, a political form where everyone sort of has a voice. In one sense, you can look at social media and say it's an equalizer. That insofar as some form of technology, at least in the North Atlantic West, is available to many people now, it gives everyone a sort of platform. It gives everyone a sort of voice to express things about which they're passionate, things about which they think are significant in the life of the world. It gives them a place to enter into public discourse with other humans around that. And in that sense, a sort of basic raw data point of view, I think more people are in discourse than we might have had 10 or 15 years ago. And discourse has been more accessible to a lot of people. I think the shadow side of that is, although there are lots of voices included, I think sometimes what happens is it's easy for this to lapse into sort of the mere assertion of opinion without people fact-checking or really having a knowledge base from which to make claims. So everybody's participating, but I think it changes the level of discourse at the same time. And I do think that's a shadow side. Everybody's talking, everyone has an opinion, everyone has a platform. But in many ways, it's obscured information. Aside from what people think and what their opinions are. It's difficult with the advent of the pervasiveness, the ubiquity of social media to kind of go, oh, is this true? How might we discern the difference between truth and opinion in this case? How would we even go about sort of curating these kinds of responses? And I think that's why that language of curation has become so important around these kinds of things. And it's a difficult concept. Who is in a position to say, this is worth reading, this is not worth reading? With everyone participating in a sort of marketplace of ideas, that gets more and more challenging. And I think we can see some of the consequences of that. But at a basic level, it invites everyone to the table, and there's a beauty in that. And you can see, thinking back to the Arab Spring several years ago, how social media was used to organize people that otherwise would not have had a way to do it. So you can certainly see that those are some of the outcomes that are very positive that have come from this. But there's a shadow side too. Ooh, yeah. Let me check my phone. Like, yeah, you see people walking around, heads down, phone all the time, and people see me doing that, so it's not just that I'm seeing others. Yeah, especially with the cell phone, with the smartphone now, we're sort of trained, it's almost a leash, you know, we're tethered to this thing, we're tethered to its beeping and its buzzings, and so much of that does have to do with social media. It's interesting in the way that increasingly all relationships are being more and more technologically mediated. That makes me nervous, makes me uncomfortable. I think humans are embodied creatures, and we're at our healthiest when we're with each other in ways where we're flesh and blood together. I think the promise of social media, and really the internet more broadly, was the idea that it sort of functioned as a prosthesis. It was an extension of real things. But I wonder if we're not at a place now where it's what one philosopher calls a simulacra, where the representation, the extension, becomes the thing itself and ends up replacing it in the long run. And I think we flirted with that, where increasingly we're at a place where we don't know how to have relationships that aren't technologically mediated. So the sort of fill-in, the mediated version is becoming more real than the real thing. And I don't think we're there, but you can see the ways in which we're tending in that direction relationally, and that's a little frightening. It's a little unnerving, I think. Enormous ones. I mean, as I think about the last couple of election cycles in the United States, I think that it's social media as a means of communication is open to disinformation. It's open to things that confuse, things that divide because of the way in which it amplifies, the way in which it isn't flesh and blood. And I don't think it's terribly surprising that right now we have someone that was probably best known before the election as an entertainer. is a TV personality. I think as we move to a way of relating to each other that's highly mediated and driven by technology, you know, I wonder when we'll be able to tell the difference between watching The Voice or American Idol and an American presidential campaign. That although all of those things at some level are democratic, what's the danger of this kind of mediation? What's the danger of sort of the dark sides of the discourse that this brings into being? And I think that will continue to affect and change America's political life. I think it'll lower the level of discourse. It's going to make it even meaner. And the kind of things that we look for in leaders will shift dramatically.